The last video we watched introduced you to the idea of biogeochemical cycles, and I introduced you to the water cycle. During this video, we're going to explore nutrient cycles, particularly the carbon cycle. Nutrient cycles are the chemicals that organisms need to sustain life. Now, some of you may be thinking fruits and veggies and things that we eat. Now, those are nutrients for us, but these cycles explore it on a chemical level. They explore the nutrients that all organisms need in an ecosystem. Through this lesson, we're going to explore carbon, but in the following lessons, we're going to explore nitrogen and phosphorus. Now, the first thing, the carbon cycle is a little tricky, but let's start where we already know. CO2. CO2 is taken down from the atmosphere by producers. Now, we just studied this. Producers, through a process called photosynthesis, use CO2 to produce energy for themselves and to release oxygen. Now, oxygen is then used by consumers, who go through cellular respiration to produce CO2, which is then released back into the atmosphere. So this part of the cycle is seen right over here. CO2 comes down from the atmosphere and is used by the producers through photosynthesis to make oxygen, which is then used by the consumers, who then do cellular respiration to create CO2 and put it back out into the atmosphere. Now, the next thing that we're going to explore is what role decomposers play in this process down over here. Now, we all know that producers and consumers die and decomposers decompose them. Now, during this process, once the sediment is decomposed, it's compressed by heat and pressure for millions of years. And through millions of years, this decomposed organic matter becomes fossil fuels. Now, hopefully fossil fuels ring a bell for some of you, since it's what we use to fuel our cars, it's what we use to heat our homes. Now, when we dig up these fossil fuels like oil and burn them in our cars or in our homes, we release CO2 back into the atmosphere. Now, many of you know about this because a lot of people are worried about it in things like recycling and things like that because of what it's doing to our environment. This release of CO2 is not supposed to happen. It's a human-made interaction. However, it does occur occasionally in nature. When trees are burned, CO2 is released back into the atmosphere. But because we are burning fossil fuels, more than necessary is released. As you can see, this is where the trees are burned, and this is what we are doing. This is human release of CO2 due to the burning of fossil fuels. Now, the next thing we're going to explore is actually what happens in marine life. Now, when marine life dies, it becomes marine sediment on the bottom of the ocean. This is slowly turned into rock, and it's compressed into geological form. This is the rock. This is volcanoes. So here we have the ocean sediment, and it's decomposed, and it's stored in rocks and sediment, and then through geological activity such as volcanic activity or things of that nature, it is released back into the environment. Now, the final step in the carbon cycle that we're going to observe is the simplest. When it rains, CO2 is absorbed by the rain. Some of it runs off into the ocean. The rest of it goes back up into the atmosphere. It's pretty simple. Now, let's go over it one more time. And we're going to look at the steps one more time. Now, our first step, remember, CO2 comes down. Producers use it in photosynthesis. Consumers then use the product of photosynthesis for cellular respiration, which releases it back into the atmosphere. All right? Then, when those producers and consumers die, through millions of years, pressure, after they're decomposed by decomposers, pressure and heat packs them down and then forms fossil fuels, which we then burn, which releases CO2 back into the atmosphere. This is also released when forests are burnt. The next one, remember, is a similar cycle to the producer and the consumer, but in marine life. So when marine life decomposes, it forms marine sediment, which is then absorbed into geological processes, the rock, which is then released in geological events such as volcanoes. And we also have the nice little friendly, when it rains, CO2 is absorbed, goes into the ocean, comes back out. The carbon cycle is a complicated cycle. So I highly recommend rewatching this video and breaking it down step by step. Now there are 2 more videos for you guys to view tonight. We're going to go over the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle. This one personally though I think is the toughest cycle, so be sure to know it.